Hola, hello, bienvenido, and welcome to the Clearbirth Podcast. Today we have Andrea Syms-Brown with us, who is an international board certified lactation consultant in private practice. Born and raised in Trinidad and Tobago, she is very well established and highly regarded in New York City, having been an independent newborn care specialist educator for over 3 decades, and in private practice as an IBCLC for 20 years and a certified infant massage instructor for 12 years. Andrea has served as both president and education director of the New York Lactation Consultant Association. She is the founder of Baby in the Family, LLC, which offers popular prenatal education workshops online and in-group sessions around New York City for almost 2 decades. Welcome, Andrea. Thank you so much for being part of my podcast.
Well, thank you. Muchas gracias. That's as much Spanish as I can say, not without embarrassing myself. So thank you, Annette.
Oh,
I'm
that's,
grateful that you asked me to be here today.
oh no, wonderful. I just want to talk about, your career and just let people know about you and the wonderful work that you've been doing in New York City. And that's how we met. I met at a lactation consult with a client, and I was like, she's amazing. And this must be about 10 years ago now. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, the good old days
The good
when
old
we
days.
could all walk around and embrace each other. Yeah.
Exactly. And speaking of that, how are you holding up during COVID,
You
during
know
the
what?
self-isolation?
I'm a homebody, so this is fine for me. I mean, it's a little crazy when I go out and people try to come up to me and say, "Hey, I haven't seen you in so long," and I have to go, "Wait, get away from me."
Yeah.
I think the hardest part is not moving. I'm a
Yeah.
pretty active person, and I hate exercising inside. I prefer walking.
Yes, I
I'm,
do
a, I'm
too.
from the Caribbean. We walk the beach,
Yes,
right? And so
exactly.
that's been the hardest part because I am eating everything inside. Other than that, I'm fine.
I'm with you on that eating everything. It's like snack time is all of the time. And I just have to okay, you really don't need another one of those.
Right.
Yes,
I
yeah.
found good ways to sort of fill my time. I love reading, I love watching movies, I love working, and I love sleeping.
Yeah.
So I just take a nap, and it's
Yeah.
so much better than eating.
It definitely is. Well, I'm going to jump right in and just start. And I wanted to ask you, what career did you wanted to do when you were in grade school, high school, and in college?
That's a great question. I always wanted to be a teacher. And I
Oh,
wanted to be a math teacher because I hope nobody from Trinidad is listening. I had the worst math teachers in high school,
hmm.
and uh, and I always thought that I could do better than them. I
Oh,
said, if
wow.
I were ever going to teach, I'm going to make sure that people understand every single concept in geometry and algebra rather than sort of fly through things. So I always wanted to be a teacher. That was it.
So math.
Math teacher. Yeah, math teacher. I always liked science and math, and my parents definitely, we know what parents in the Caribbean are like. They're like, go to
Yes, West
school,
Indian
um,
parents. You
do
go to school, become a doctor, a lawyer, the
yes,
top three,
yes.
doctor,
My
lawyer.
my parents were always be productive. Don't be a lump. Nobody likes a lump, so be productive. And I always thought, being a math teacher would be the best thing because it would give that person that I'm teaching, that class, everything to move forward in life. And breastfeeding is the
Yeah.
same thing. So it's kind of crossroads right there.
Oh, yeah, exactly. It's kind of like a small crossword. So
Yeah.
before you started doing this work, what did you do?
Well, I'm embarrassed to say I was a banker. I was a terrible banker for a couple of years. I mean, really, I was awful because I had the kind of job where you'd sort of entice people to take a loan, and I would
Yeah.
always say, "But you've got $350,000 in the bank. Why do you need to borrow 20 grand? The interest alone?" And then they would come and say, "No, you can't do that. How do you get a bonus if you don't
You're
sell
not
the
making
loans?"
money. Yes,
Girl,
you're
I
not
did
making
not
money
last
for the bank.
long. I did not last long, but before that, I mean, after that, I became a baby nurse. And that
Oh,
just opened the world of birthing to me. I never wanted to be a mom. And so when I would hang out with new mothers, I could see them become this different person. And I mean, as a
yeah.
doula, I'm sure you see
Yeah.
that
You
all
see it
the time.
all
And
the
it
time.
just pulled me in. It was not the path that I had intended, but here I am.
So how long were
Yeah.
you a baby nurse before you decided to go further?
I was a baby nurse from 1988 early 88, and then I became a IBCLC in 2000. And somewhere in the early to mid 90s, I started to see that I had a stronger preference for my babies who were breastfed. No offense to the moms who were not breastfeeding, but as a baby nurse, kind of like a mom. And I realized, wow, the breast milk bomb, it's not so bad. I could manage 10 minutes. Other stuff, I would just be like, get this off of me. And my mother, who's a huge breast milk and breastfeeding advocate in Trinidad and Tobago, said to me, we didn't raise you to be a baby nurse. Why don't you become a pediatrician? And they really pressed that button a lot. And so because I was mostly interested in the science of human lactation, I started to read and study on my own. And so in 2000, I did the program out with Linda Smith, the amazing and wonderful Linda Smith in Ohio. And she said to me, you're going to pass, you're going to do beautifully, and I'm going to hear about you. And that year I took the exam and I passed on the first try.
So tell me a little bit about the training that was involved in becoming an IBCLC.
Well, this was in the old days. This was 20 years ago, when the IBLCE, the Board of Educators, were looking for people who were just interested in becoming lactation consultants. So my training was on the job, and I was supervised by a couple of pediatricians. And so they were able to sign off on my hours. And I think at that time, the requirement was, let's say, 500 hours. And I had like 15,000 hours because I had worked with so many breastfeeding families that a couple of pediatricians said to me, you just need to know the labels for these things because you understand. We don't ever have to come in when the baby's being breastfed because you really have it covered, which I think kind of surprised them. And so, my hours were easily included. And so when I had to do the actual theory, I did it with Linda Smith out in Ohio, in Dayton, Ohio. Now things have changed because there were different pathways at the time, and I was lucky that I was trying to qualify at a time where it wasn't as confusing as it is now, and we didn't count down seconds. I find that the young people who become IBCLCs now, they spend an enormous amount of time and money learning about something that I consider to be an ancient art that should be open to everyone, and that's a whole other conversation. But that's my pet peeve. The interns that I've worked with, I've never charged anybody because I don't feel it's something that we need to charge people to pass on this knowledge. I'm 55, at some point I'm going to be dead. And I want people to understand the technique of natural breastfeeding, which is that's my soapbox, no pillows, nothing. Do what your grandparents.
Yes, exactly. So that you said, that was fascinating that you said that now there's this new barrier, there's this new entryway where people are charging to learn the information that they know so that they can pass it along. And that to me seems like it would be a barrier to entry for most folks, no?
Well, dare I say, particularly people of color, right? Most women who go into this field are either mothers themselves or have come through some kind of birthing industry. They're doulas, they're baby nurses, and they've worked. And so now we're asking them to learn, not work as many hours, and pay for this, which, I'm not saying it's bad for other people, but for my world, I don't see the need to charge. I think it's way too much of a visceral or a basic activity that we pass along. I mean, the stuff in books we have to pay to learn. I understand that. But to sit and observe me work with a nursing mom and understand how this baby needs to react to just to be fed, which is so basic. I never charge people for that.
Yeah. That's wonderful to know. That's good that, because I hear that the cost of it can be pretty expensive for what some people are charging upwards of $10,000 just to do that.
This girl.
Yes. Yes. Oh, okay. Well, you heard it first here. Andrea doesn't charge, but don't take advantage. I do feel that there should be some kind of reciprocation for the work. If you're offering someone those hours, there should be something that they're offering you, but I do appreciate the understanding of not charging because then you're allowing more people to come in and do this work, which is beautiful, which is true, like you said, to be a doula and work the hours that we work, and then to try to do this. And what I think the requirements now is 5,000 hours or something like that. You have to have 5,000 hours before you can fully finish your training, and that's a lot of hours to work, and
Yes, because
not
it's counted in minutes.
in
It's
minutes.
counted in minutes, right? And there's specific things that count, and there are other things that don't count. But I will say, the people that I have brought in as interns, when I was 12 years old, my best friend said to me, you and I get along, and she's still my best friend, get along really well because we're not stupid. And I remember thinking, I was pretty stupid at the time, and I remember thinking, wow, she must know something about me. But it turns out what she was trying to say is, people who are curious and interested, I gravitate towards them. And so when I bring in, a whole bunch of interns, the ones who are not that curious and interested tend to fall by the wayside. And the ones who are sharp and acute and looking and listening are the people that I tend to say, okay, you need to come with me and see this. So there's a huge, there's a filter that people have to go through if they're going to be working with most of my colleagues or me. And mine is never, ever, ever financial. It's all about this and this.
Oh. I'm back.
I'm here.
Okay. I had lost connection for a second. I was just texting Raul to say I had lost, but he's recording, so that's great.
Oh.
So I had wanted to ask too, so you mentioned the training and the hours. What was the exam like?
You mean in terms of what did I expect, or just
Or
what
what
comes
was
on the
the
exam?
teaching for the, yes, what comes on the exam? Like what are the things that you had to learn, just
Right.
not just the physics of breastfeeding, but the training behind it?
Right. What I appreciate about the IBLCE program is that they try to make it very well-rounded, right? So there's
Okay.
biochemistry, there's toxicology, all the stuff that I'm really into, biology, of
Mhm.
course, chemistry, that kind of stuff. But there's also a side where they ask us to sort of have compassion, right? And be gentle and be kind. Big part of being a good lactation, one of the best lactation consultants is being a really good listener. When I work with people, I say to them, no talking, just
Yeah.
observe and listen. Doulas become the best lactation consultants because you ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure there's some male doulas, I don't know, are tuned into what mom is feeling without her having to say that. And I have
Exactly.
to say to the doula, okay, now I want you to bring that to the baby because mom is
Mhm.
going to feel what she's feeling, but as far as I'm concerned, the focus should always be on the baby because the baby's the one who's got to eat. And
Yeah.
um, if we focus on the baby's concerns, things tend to go really well. And moms, of course, appreciate that.
Yeah.
So, the stuff that was on the exam is very well rounded in the science, but also the human aspect of it. Right. So,
Mm.
anybody who wants to become a lactation consultant, you do need to have some science background, but if you're not a
Mhm.
kind person or a gentle person, or you don't have the ability to be kind or gentle, become a banker, become a lawyer, because it is what it
Those will
is.
serve you much
It
better
takes,
than.
absolutely, it takes that out of you. And if you
Yeah.
can't find that way to emote with somebody, I've never been a mom. I tell people straight up, I don't want to be a mom. I get it, but
Mhm.
it's easy for me to mother somebody, you know what I mean? And
Definitely.
that's why I call my
Definitely.
company Baby in the Family, because it's a play on words. I'm babying the family, not just it's a baby,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Or the
Yeah.
mom. And so, you know, in terms of what's in the exam, to be more specific, it's a lot of science, but
A lot of
nothing to
science.
be turned off of, because it's a science of this and it's a science of that. And then after that,
Yeah.
there's some other stuff, but it's easy. It's not that hard.
What do you wish you were told? It's not that. So what do you wish that you were told before you started this work?
I think I went into it with open eyes, Annette, because as a baby nurse, I was a baby nurse for all those years from the late 80s into 2000. And I still do some nights here and there for people. I observed how lactation consultants would come into my clients' homes and make an attempt to sort of make suggestions. And I wish that I could go back in time and say to these people, don't talk so much, just listen. So I came into this, and I say this with really all the empathy in the world. It's not the hardest job in the world, but you do need to sort of be empathic, be vulnerable, be compassionate. And so I came in with that because of my background. Honestly, there's nothing has surprised me so far.
Yeah. What are the biggest challenges that new moms are facing when it comes to breastfeeding?
That's one of my favorite questions to answer. The number one thing that I think today's women feel is surprised by how vulnerable they become. Right?
Yes.
I mean, yeah, they're worried about the supply and the nipples, and you could read that anyway. But the true secret is that these mothers look around the world and they're like, oh my God, it's not just me. I have to care for this person. And that vulnerability and that limbic brain and, becoming an animal basically is the thing that I think most mothers are surprised by. And they need us in the birthing business to basically, encompass them with tremendous amounts of love and empathy and compassion, because this is what I think. I mean, I've never been a mom, like I said, but this is what I see works. When I talk to anybody who's becoming a mom, I say to them, what's in it for you? Yeah. What is this mothering thing going to be for you? This is a pregnant person. And then I ask them the same question after they become moms, and the answers are vastly different. Different. Because
can you share some?
Mom, yeah, one of the things that sticks out to me is years ago when I was a baby nurse, I met somebody who was already a mother of one child, and she had not breastfed successfully. And she hired me as a baby nurse because she was told by her friend, who had a second child as well, this baby nurse is the best. She can help you with the breastfeeding. Don't worry about it. And she went on and had 3 more children after that. And every time she had a child, she would say to me, if it wasn't for you, I would not have had this third and this fourth child.
That's wonderful.
And she'd had a lactation consultant with her first child. I'm not going to say who, right? And this was not a woman of color. I mean, this was, and she said to me, what you brought to me and the ability to sort of emote through this experience with me was not what I expected when you spoke to me when I was still pregnant. And that was the difference. She was very mechanical. I want you to show me how to latch the baby and get him on a schedule and all of that. And then when I showed up to be her night nurse, because I was doing just nights then, this is in the late 90s, she said, what you brought in once that baby was born, the person that I was not the person that you met before when I was pregnant. And she'd already been a mom.
Yeah.
So I think every woman is different, to be honest. But the one thing that I see that's the underlying thread among all these new moms, even if they've had 4 children before, is that rawness, that sense of being completely vulnerable. That often surprises them.
Yes. I have to agree. I was a doula for 4 years before I became a mom to my son. And I know that the second he was born, my whole world shifted. And that experience in the beginning of uncertainty with breastfeeding and also experiencing raw nipples. And he went the first 8 days of his life without pooping. So I was on edge. And once we figured out, we just needed to do something else, a little bit different. It was just like, okay, that shift. And once that happened, it was like, if you said, eat this, drink that, do that. I was eating and drinking everything possible to make lactation happen. That was my job. It was my new job. I had people in my life telling me that, you really should get some sleep. And I'm like, what? There's no such thing as sleep when you have a new baby. And if I need to, I was put on a really strict regimen. I was told to pump, supplement, and nurse. And as you know, I was not given an end date. So I'm doing this endlessly. And then at one morning at around 3 in the morning, I was teetering on the edge of my bed, just rocking and going, I'm going to lose my mind
Oh,
because
honey.
I did not know what when was this going to stop? And then I said, I have to figure out what works for me, and I really, like you said, honed in on that instinct of being a mother and going, okay, they told me to do this, that doesn't work. Let me figure out a schedule that did work. And I decided, I was like, I'll pump all day and do all of the stuff I have to do all day, but at night I am going to sleep and just nurse him. And from there, it took me a while before my milk came in. I have to say it took me about 3 months, but I did it.
Mm,
That was my only job that I had
good
to
for
do,
you.
and I did it. So it's like, and it was, I had some consultants come in. Like I said, I had a consultant, and she told me this schedule, and then she disappeared.
I'm
So
sorry about that.
so yeah, I went on this quest to figure out what to do afterwards. But I'd love to hear from you. Like, what do your services entail? When do people contact you? Do they contact you before, during, after? What's the latest like you've been called to help with breastfeeding?
I'll answer the last question first.
Okay.
What's the latest that I've been called to help with breastfeeding? 3 months in.
Oh,
I
yeah.
want to tell you that story. I met this woman who was from mainland China. So I'm from the West Indies, so I don't call China China. I call it
Yes.
mainland China.
Yeah.
And her pediatrician had recommended me because the pediatrician, of course, which is most of my clients come through pediatricians and obstetricians, and of course I teach as well. But this pediatrician said she speaks no Mandarin, but she's going to help you get this child breastfed. And the woman herself was a student. She was working on a PhD in something scientific, and she got me pregnant. And her entire family and support network was at home in China. And I
Mm,
showed up with my doll and me and my scale. And her husband spoke some English. And so, we kind of mimed and, sort of thing. And I put the doll on my lap and I said, just sit, just put your baby like that and take your shirt off. And she did. And literally, Annette, within 3 minutes, this baby went like this and latched right on. And
oh,
she was struggling with a
wow.
boppy pillow around her
Tell
belly. And she was
those
like
poppies.
this. She was like this fat. So the boppy was like falling down. And I said
Oh,
to her,
no
just get rid of
pillows.
that. Just sit her on her lap. And the baby literally looked at her breast, looked up at her mom, and knew exactly what to do.
It's
So
incredible.
people find me through my classes, through other
Mhm.
clients, through their pediatricians, their obstetricians, and they will hire me from the time they get a pee on the stick positive, especially if it's a second or third time, all the way to, like I said, that sweet story of a 3-month-old. Um, Most times, especially nowadays with the pandemic, most people are hiring me right when they need me, right?
Mhm.
Because they come home and they're not really in the space yet to sort of navigate the process of hiring somebody. So they're complaining to their best friend on their phone, or they're talking to their mom, and the mom says, oh, you know what? Jake's friend had a baby and they had a lactation consultant who was great.
Yes.
Call her. And then there's this grapevine because mothers connect.
Yes.
Mothers connect. And I have a global practice. So I have clients in Australia and New Zealand
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
Nepal because these are relatives of clients here. And
Yes.
then they spread the word, and then their neighbors, and then their friend in another town. And so, I'm really proud of what I've built, the company that I've built, and the work that I do, because my focus is all about getting what you want to happen. So
Yeah.
clients say to me, well, I'm not sure. And I say to them, well, close your eyes and just imagine, what
Mhm.
would your best case scenario be? And
Yes.
that's what I'm going to help you achieve.
That's
So,
amazing. Yeah, it works. So walk me through being a new mom. I come home. I had no doula. I got minimal help in the hospital with breastfeeding. And my pediatrician has told me to pump to see how much I yield, and I should supplement with every feeding.
Mhm. And then she calls me,
And
right?
then she calls you.
All
Yes.
right. And she calls me, and number one, I always say, okay, once she decides to hire me, my first question is, okay, what do you want to have happen? Tell me
Yes.
what you want. And when I would show up at people's home, it was always, why am I here? Now I just go, okay, I understand what's happening because we all have these, HIPAA compliant forms
Mm-hmm.
online that they fill out. So I know the story beforehand, but I really want to get a sense of what this mom wants. And oftentimes she just wants to feed her child. She just
Yes.
wants to feed her child. That's it. Could I
Yes.
just get rid of all of the noise? And oftentimes we can release half of the work that she's doing and let the baby do the work. So if a mom is in physical pain with nipple damage, I'm going to help her guide that baby to latch deeply so it's not so superficial and hurting the
Mm-hmm.
nipples itself. And then we can decide from there whether or not we do need to continue with all the additional steps that she's been taking, like salting her nipples. And somebody said to me, I'm putting salt on it, and then I put the saran wrap on it, and then I put the blow dryer on it. And I was like,
Saran
girl,
wrap. That's too
girl, you
to,
would
and
not
a blow
believe
dryer.
stuff. I was like, okay, let's pretend that there's no electricity and there's no plastic, like your grandmother or your great grandmother.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
bring them back to their own ancestral experiences. Because,
The baby.
not too off topic, but it turns out, and the evidence proves this, that our DNA carries the memory of our ancestors, right?
Yes.
So that's not so out there anymore. And so
Mm-hmm.
I often say to mothers, what did your great grandmother do? She didn't do any of this, right?
Exactly.
She figured it out without my help because she
Exactly.
had your grandmother or your grandfather on her lap showing her what to do. And that's what we do. Most times we're doing much more work as women in general than we need
Mm-hmm.
to do. And as moms, that multiplies by itself,
Right.
right? So if we can sort of just quiet the noise and bring mom and baby into that flow, I swear to God, it sounds kind of hippie like, but it really
It
does
works.
make a difference.
It makes it sounds, yes, it makes sense. And I think that people are really concerned, right? Because they're hearing your baby has to pee this many a times and your baby has to poop this many a times and this is what the poop looks like. And if your baby loses 9% of its birth weight the first week, then we have to work and do all of these things. So it's like you said, the noise. And it sounds like you take away that noise and say, just focus on your baby and your baby's needs. But what about the clients who are like, I want to get back to my sleep? Like, when do I put this baby on a schedule? And which to
Mhm.
me is always heartbreaking. But
Mhm.
that is the reality of our society. Yes, we can tell people to slow down, but we also have to tell them they what is your advice for that?
Right. Well, back when I was a new lactation consultant, I would say, well, let's get a sleep consultant. And I even did some sleep consulting myself. What I've learned is that babies need what babies need.
Yes.
And you can say, this is what I want. And your 2-day-old, 2-month-old, 2-year-old, 12-year-old, 22-year-old, or 55-year-old is going to do exactly what she or he is designed to do,
Yes.
right? So oftentimes when mothers or parents in general, moms and moms or moms and dads or even dads and dads, they say to me, well, this is what we would like to have happen. And I go, well, okay, the, the, the first three things you said, we can do that. The last one, that's up to the kid. So have you had that conversation with them? I'm very flat about it. I
Yes.
don't make big platitudes about anything. It's just, look, the baby stomach is the size of a cotton ball. So good luck with that one.
Yes.
And I often push a lot of evidence. Like I'll say, well, I'll say it like that. And then I'll follow up with an email with a lot of information about babies getting dehydrated at night because they're being forced to sleep. And I don't have to say
Yes.
that. I go, well, read up on that. Here's some links that talk about that because, it's not practical. Boom. That's all I say because I'm
Yeah.
not in the business, honestly, of convincing anybody to breastfeed or to
Or
not
not.
breastfeed or to sleep train or to not sleep train. I tell my clients, and anybody who knows me knows I say this to everybody. Nobody can convince me to have children. So I'm not going to convince you to do
Yes.
anything that you don't want to do, but I'm going to give you the evidence and then you can make an informed decision. Tell you, nine
Yeah.
out of 10 of my clients are like, oh, all right, okay, I get it.
Yes.
And they go along. And then years later, when that child is 5 or 6, and
Hmm.
the next child or the third child is born, they're like, remember when I thought that I could get him to sleep or get him to eat on a schedule? What a
Schedule.
dummy I
Yes.
was. I
I
go,
tell
no,
people
that's
all of yes. I tell my clients all of the times, they say baby rule for a reason because they do. You can do just like labor, you can't make it happen. They will let you know when they are ready to come, and they will come when they're ready to come. They don't know what a due date is. They don't have a calendar in there. They don't have a time, a clock. They're not on your OBGYN schedule. They're not
That's
ready.
right.
Okay. And so,
Let him go camping. It's fine. We're here.
yeah,
We're good.
yeah,
Get a midwife.
it's that it sounds to me that the biggest, besides your information and the education that you're bringing, um, you're really allowing moms to open up and find a space to be comfortable with the decisions that they want to make. Do you find that that's the best practice? Like that's what you're bringing, is like just giving them the space to say, I want to do X or I don't. Like there's some moms who don't want to breastfeed, but are being told
It's
that
all
they should
good.
breastfeed because
Oh,
it's good for
honey.
the baby. And it goes against, we don't know what kind of trauma they've experienced or they're carrying, and they just can't. So it sounds like you give them the permission to say, no, I really don't want to do this. And how do I do
I,
it some other way?
you said something a few minutes back. You said, my instinct kicked in at 3 o'clock in the morning. And that's when your ancestors are talking to
Yes.
you. That's when your DNA is rubbing its
Yes.
hands together and going, girl, what the hell are you doing?
You do it. Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
You're right. I think in this day and age, every individual should have a choice to do as she or he wishes, as long as you're not harming anybody else. And human beings I should say, most human beings want to do the best for themselves and for their descendants. So I hardly ever have to convince somebody to breastfeed or provide their milk to their baby. But I have clients who are like, look, okay, I'll tell you this. And probably as a doula, this, as a lactation consultant, as an IBCLC, one of the questions that I ask, and I know my colleagues ask, is about sexual abuse in childhood, right? Domestic abuse in the home, even if it's emotional abuse, that takes a toll on our being, on our ability to nurture, right? So
Yes.
if I have a client who's like, my father raped me and my mother was an ass, excuse my French, then my thing is, well, what do you want to bring to this child? You
Exactly.
know,
Hmm.
what do you feel as a mother you want to, how do you want to express this? And the mothers who say to me, look, I want the milk, but I don't want this holding thing. My job is to help them produce as much milk as possible so that baby never has to have donor milk or, God forbid, corporate milk. You know what
Yes.
I mean? This woman wants to provide her milk, but she's not into the touch part. Cool, no problem. We'll figure it out. And I often say to them, well, just try nuzzling once a day. What's nuzzling? Or just let him lick your nipple. That way, his DNA from his spit gets into your
Yes.
ducts, and then you making the milk that he needs. And that often leads to, well, we started nursing just once a day, and it's not so bad.
Yeah. Yes.
It's the
Yes.
baby who runs the show, honey, not
Yes.
me. So if
Hmm.
you want to make the milk, but you don't want to breastfeed, most of those women, no problem. We can do this.
Yeah, that's amazing. And what percentage would you say? Because every mother, especially my clients, a lot of times will tell me, well, I don't know if I'm producing, right? And and I feel that there's this lack of education that happens about women's bodies and not understanding, because a lot of times I tell them, like, you start producing breast milk at 4 months of pregnancy. Are you aware? And they're like, no, I had no idea, but I don't feel anything. And it's like, yes, you're not supposed to feel it yet, but you notice the little yellow sticky at the end of the day when you take off your bra, that's your milk. Like the confidence that their bodies are doing the things that it needs to do to produce the milk. So when you have someone who comes to you and says, how do I know my baby's getting enough? What advice do you give them?
Well, of course, we have the mechanical
Yes.
answer. That
Hmm.
first week, we need to have as many poops as your age and days, right?
Yes.
But then there's always, does your baby look really drunk at the end of breastfeeding? Do your breasts feel different? Do you see breast leaking from the other side while he's nursing?
Yes.
Do you feel a little bit sleepy just about 30 minutes into the feeding? And usually, as long as the answer is yes, I go, well, chances are you're doing fine. The sleepy 30 to 40 minutes into feeding is hormonal. So
Hmm.
if a mom feels that, that's the baby's feeling that, she's feeling it, there's something happening. There's some
Yes.
magic between these two humans and this dyad. Unfortunately, though, we come back to the peas and poos, because what goes in must come out. And there are a small amount of babies who would not release as much poops, especially. I tend to keep a close eye on those clients because especially nowadays where I can't go to your home
and see
measure
diapers.
babies in my business before and after they feed. That's the only way. Nowadays people are renting their own. But on what's coming out to tell us, but all the two things. Does your baby satiated when he's done? Does his belly look bigger? I often share pictures from my practice, actually, of babies hungry on the scale, and you see their bellies kind of concave. And then when they're full, you see this little sack sticking out on the left side. And I tell you, people are keen to that kind of information because it's visual. It's not this thing beside the piece and who's that you see his stomach, sticking out there on the left side, and your breast feels significant at the front. That's one of those signs.
That's great. Those are great visual cues, right? Because we're not looking at our babies. Like I often tell moms, like, look at your baby. What is your baby saying? Because babies are born communicating, and people really don't understand that. They don't speak English, but they are born communicating. It's like you're meeting someone who is deaf or mute. You would find a way to communicate with them. Your baby is communicating the same way. And I find that at times the biggest concerns that moms have after, okay, I'm feeding my baby is, when do I introduce a bottle? What advice do you give for pumping and introducing a bottle?
Right. Well, what's the bottle for? That's always my question. Who's doing the bottle again? Oh, okay. Your partner wants to get involved because he or she feels like she's outside. Well, tell them, listen, there are feet to be rubbed. But, to specifically answer that question about bottles, but I do go off on that sort of trip with them. And I go, feeding is just one thing. We need to diaper this kid. We need to bathe him. We need to get him undressed. We need to soothe him. We need to give him snuggles. And once we've covered well, your nipples feel. Your nipples are fine and all is going well with baby. We can kick in with some relief bottles here and there if you need a break. Medication as we wait until breastfeeding is well established. In some ways I'm very by the book as an IBCLC, and in other ways I'm just like, I don't need to take that part on. And there's a lot that I say that too. But the by the book part about waiting for breastfeeding to be as well established, that is important because it's the baby's perspective. If baby is a professional breastfeeder, then we can say, and here's this other thing, chop. And the baby's like, okay, chopsticks. All right, let me see if I can learn how to do this. So my is always which they kind of do reflexively, meaning your nipples are fine, gaining weight, juice there, and then usually that's anywhere between 2 and 6 hours. Except for the mom, like in your case, where you needed to express to stimulate your breasts to increase production. If everything's going well, oftentimes my clients, I don't mind. I kind of like this, and let them do all the grunt work.
Exactly. And
so
then
I keep things from the baby's perspective.
Always a baby's perspective. That's a great way to look at things, and a great way to give advice, because I think a lot of times parents are thinking of themselves or thinking, oh yes, there is a baby, but not really focusing on the baby. Whereas if they just slow down, like I understand we're in COVID and all, and everyone is concerned about being in the homes, but I also think about all of those families that are those new moms that are really being forced now to stay home and be with their babies and don't have to worry about rushing to get back to work at 16 weeks or 18 weeks or 12 weeks, and now have that extra time and the luxury and the gift it is of having a true postpartum period, which is something we don't have really in this country as a true postpartum. And what do you find is like the greatest support to the mom outside of hiring an IBCLC? Like, what do you tell the dads in the sense of, like we talked about a little bit of, oh, what can I do? I want to be able to feed the baby, like the baby won't eat for the rest of its life, but that's another story. But like, I want to feed the baby. How can I help? How can I be involved in this process?
Any partner that wants to be involved, I give them credit. My thing is, I have the best husband in the world. I I mean, I work very, very, I'm focused, I'm very devoted to my work. So my grocery shopping, because I go into the grocery and I come home with all of these disparate things. And he's like, but we can't cook anything because you've got like 5 different things going on here.
Things that
I
don't
can't
match.
focus in a grocery, right?
Yes.
Yeah, they don't. It's like, why would you buy this and that? We can't cook that. So the partner who says, and many do, because I want to hear from that partner, because that's the person who's in it with you, right? In the trenches. My thing is, what are your strengths? Or you want to feed that baby. Okay, what else is there that you can do that doesn't include feeding the baby? I listen to everything. And then once they're ready to do the actual feeding, I go, okay, well, you're in charge of washing the pump parts, because she's got to hand express or machine express that milk out of her body. Mm-hmm. And you're in charge of making sure that baby is drinking from this bottle comfortably. So I teach dads how, I shouldn't say dads, I teach partners how to do paced bottle feeding. Because if you've got a partner who's like going to do the groceries and take care of the baby, I say, let that person do it. So rather than go, well, no, you can't do that, I go, if she's cool with it, I'm cool with it. Let's do it. Yeah. And bless their hearts, most partners just want to be involved, right? Especially for a breastfeeding family. There's so much cuddling involved that I often go, well, once that baby's belly's full, you're up, because that baby's need to be held upright for at least 20 minutes before you put him or her on his back. So guess what? You're the snuggle bunny for us. So, and they love that. I get lots of pictures of partners wearing their newborns, either in one of those kangaroo t-shirts with the pockets or in a carrier, and just looking at their computer or looking out the window, or having a cold drink, as I always say, no hot coffee, or on their phones or watching TV. Because I say to them, don't feel guilty if that baby's in there asleep and you need to do other things. You don't have to focus on this person, because they're not focused on you. They're just happy for the heartbeat and the snuggles, and they know that your dad or your other mommy. Getting them involved is key.
Yes. That's incredible. That's really great advice. That is really a good way to have partners look at it, because everyone's always talking about the feeding, and it's like your baby is going to eat forever. This is just one small period of time that you won't be able to feed your baby. So it's great to find ways to get them involved in other ways that helps them through, and to give them that advice, to make them see that there are other ways other than that, because that's all everyone's ever concerned about. It's like, how's the baby sleeping, and who's feeding the baby, and when are you going to feed the baby? It's like the baby sleeps like a baby. Like, and the baby
every couple of hours.
Exactly, right? So there's not much more to talk about other than that. But yeah, that's really great advice. And
it's good, I think, Annette, it is valid to validate the feelings of a partner, because this person is in the trenches with his or her partner. And so whenever I do a consultation, whether it was in home or nowadays, and just so you know, my company is 100% virtual now and will always be. It's always going to be online. I always make the appointment so that both partners can be present. Or you're at your mother's house, make sure your mother is there too. Your mother-in-law is there too. Bring her in. It's a team, right? Yeah. It's a family. And this baby to a family. So why not involve the family? I love that.
Exactly. Oh, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and all of these gems that you gave me today. I have another segment that I like to call Daily Inspiration. And I will ask like 2 questions, and whatever comes to mind first, like what book, film, show, or podcast that is inspiring you right now?
Okay, well, I don't want to lie.
No, you don't have to lie. Tell the truth. No judgments.
God, every podcast that I listen to, and including this one, probably I'm going to be asleep in like 10 minutes. If anybody's talking for more than 3 or 4 minutes, people have bought me audiobooks, and they're like, oh my God, you're going to love this. This is going to keep you awake. I'm asleep in 5 minutes, because I'm not that good at listening in that format. Yeah. So for me, what I'm really into these days, I'm watching all of these old movies. Like yesterday, was it today? I lost track. I watched this movie called Julie. It's an old Alfred Hitchcock movie, and I watched Rope old Alfred Hitchcock movie. There's a theme. I
Oh,
love
I haven't heard. Yes,
all the old movies. I love,
old.
so that's the stuff that inspires me because I realize that we've come a long way as women, right? I've been watching
Yes, yeah,
Hollywood movies out of Nigeria, and I look at, how culturally how we treat women differently around
yes,
the world.
around the
So
world.
I'm kind of boring, but that's my inspiration these days. Just
That's not
looking up
boring at all. That's not
yesterday.
boring at all. And is there a quote or that inspires you every day, or a quote that motivates you that you think about?
It's one word:
One word. What's that?
breathe.
Breathe.
Breathe. There are all of these like, oh, watch where you're doing, and I can't even think of
Yes.
anything. But every
Uh-huh.
time I think of anything that stresses me, my mother would say to me all my life, Andra, which is how my name is actually pronounced, Andra, just
Dra.
breathe. Breathe,
Breathe.
just breathe. And so if I have to tell anyone, I just say to them, honey, just breathe. Because that's what you are. You're a breathing being,
Yes.
and everything is
Mm-hmm.
layered on top of that. And
Yeah.
as we age as women, that kind of wisdom just sort of gets into
Creeps
your
in.
being, and
Yeah.
it's easy to share it. If I were 25 and I said to somebody, "Oh, just breathe," they'd be like, "Get the hell out of here, lady. What are you? You're free."
Exactly.
But at 55, I
Yes.
can get away with that kind of
So
stuff.
that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that as well. It is true. Sometimes when at the heart of everything, you just have to take a moment and just
Ooh,
take a deep breath and just let everything go. So breathing
exactly.
is really
It brings you.
inspirational.
It brings us
It
back
brings
to
you
the
back to the
center of our
center.
being. Yes, very much
Exactly,
so.
exactly. And so I had wanted to ask about a birth story. And this is segment where I would usually ask a client if they have a child, and we know you don't have a child, but you
I
did
know.
share with me earlier that your mother shared your birth story, and I would
Oh
love
my
for you
God.
to share with us.
Okay, sure. Well, let me tell you, first of all, I have no children. And when I was 3, my mother said to me that when I was 3, I met one of my cousin's children. And when I came home, she goes, "What did you think about the baby?" And my first word was yuck. And she said, I said, "Why did I say that?" She goes, "I don't know, but all your life growing up until you left home at 20, she goes, people would have babies and you'd be like, yeah, we'll see that baby whenever. Not my
Mhm.
scene. I didn't like dolls. I liked trucks and cars. And I really, really was into heavy equipment, like construction
Mhm.
stuff. And I like stuffed animals and I made stuffed animals. When I asked my mother about my own birth story, here's how it went. I felt a strange sensation in my belly. I'm the third of 3. She goes, and I said to you then, don't come because it's going to be Christmas. Could you wait until after Christmas? And she goes, and you kicked me. And immediately my water broke and it was the 22nd of December. She said, and I just made it to the hospital. And they said, the nursing home, and they said, this baby's coming right now. You're fully dilated. And she said, and you were born 10 minutes later. She said, so the last thing I asked you to do, you did not do. Which is, could you wait till after Christmas? She had 2 children. She had
Check,
toddlers.
check.
My
Yes.
siblings are 3 years older than me. And she was in the middle of preparing for Christmas. And,
Christmas, yes. And
my mother was
Christmas in
Catholic.
Trinidad in the
It's
holidays
it,
is a
honey.
big deal. The house has to be perfect. Family is coming into town.
You got to
Everything, all the
cook.
food has
You got
to
to
be
bake.
brought. Yes,
Oh my God,
everything,
honey.
everything. So you didn't
I
listen then either.
She said I gave her one swift kick, and she said, and that's how she knew. She's like, this is going to be the most difficult child. But interestingly enough, when my mother got pregnant with me, all the medical advice at the time that was given to her was abort this pregnancy. It is going to kill you. She'd had surgery,
Mhm.
and they had said to her, you cannot get pregnant for a year. And she got pregnant like a month after she recovered from the surgery, major surgery, where they literally
Yes.
zip you down. This is the West
Yes.
Indies in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And the doctor kept saying, but there's no room for her to grow. This incision is going to pop. And my mother, being very, very religious, she said, if it's meant to be and I have to die, so be it. So the entire pregnancy, we would have these conversations. She said, she would say to me, well, if you're going to kill me, don't kill me today because I got to clean this and I got so kill me tomorrow. And
Yes.
so I
Yes.
was convinced that when she said to me, when she felt that, what she knew was the beginning of labor, she said, when she felt that sensation, she'd had 2 children. She's like, oh, gosh, please, could you just wait till the 26th? She goes,
Not,
and that swift kick, boom, she
was
got
like,
to
no,
the nursing home
no.
and said, that's it. This child is coming now. And I was born at 12:23 on December 23rd,
Oh,
64.
that is a great story. That is a wonderful story.
And,
Thank you.
I breastfed for 4 years.
I
I,
also, yes, went on to I grew up hearing stories. My grandmother breastfed her first child until she was 5. So that was the story I always heard. And I went on to breastfeed my son until he was 2 months shy of his 4th birthday. So when people say, "Oh, when do I'm like, don't talk to me because I had a whole toddler." So I was like, I did it for a long time and it was great. It was wonderful.
I'm
Yes.
glad you did, and it's up to the baby. I
It
always
really, yes.
baby.
I actually stopped. He did not want to stop. He did not want to stop. I was ready. I was just like, and it took me a whole year to kind of wean him. And we had conversations about it. And he was very upset every time I mentioned it. Like he would cradle my breast and be like, no. And he used to call them amis, which in French is friends. And I was just
Friend.
like, yeah. So he was like, no, not my amis. So
Oh, that's so
yeah, it
sweet.
was
Well,
really sweet.
whenever I see my mother now, especially if she just stepped out of the shower, I always go over and I put my head right
Right.
here.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Right. She and she puts her hand.
Yes,
You know,
it's a connection. It's a very sweet and special connection. And I think now with breastfeeding, it's coming back around and people are starting to see it as more of a normal thing, like breasts are for breastfeeding. And I feel that people are feeling more comfortable feeding longer. And now that, there's a big push for people to breastfeed and breastfeed in public and that it's okay. I think we're going to create a whole new society around, you know, babies who have been breastfed for longer and also nurtured, because it's not just about feeding. It's not
that's
just
right.
about food. It's about the nurturing, it's the comfort, it's the relationship, it's the closeness, it's that bond, it's that time that you have. So yes,
And
thank you
feelings of
so much. Yes.
security and connection.
Yes, connection.
Yeah.
It was always connection because it changed. I noticed that too at times when he was older. It wasn't about he wanted milk. It was that he wanted something else and he knew that that would bring him close. So we had to talk about, no, we don't want that. You want this. So yes, it is. It is just tuning in.
I
Thank you so
applaud
much.
you for
Thank
nursing
you.
a child
Oh,
for what's considered an extended period of time, because we often say to mom, shame them and say, you
yes.
don't keep nursing.
Yeah.
So I applaud you.
Oh, thank
Well
you. I
done.
appreciate it. I appreciate it. I worked really hard. I was like, I'm going to do this until the wheels fall off, and I did. Thank you so much. Andrea,
Very
thank
proud
you
of
so
you.
much for sharing your story with me and your time. I really appreciate it and appreciate you. Thank you for being on my podcast. It means the world to me to have you on and to share your wisdom.